my pleasure to introduce Senator Tim Ashe next. Senator Ashe has spent much of his professional career in pursuit of affordable housing and clean energy solutions. He has spent his legislative career, including as former chair of the House Finance Committee, doing the same. At the start of the last biennium, Senator Ashe, I believe I mentioned earlier, also joined the Senate Transportation Committee with a clear interest in tackling our most carbon-intensive sector. I've seen Senator Ashe at more and more of these types of events, and I'm grateful for what it seems like his very clear intent to really help in his leadership role ensure that Vermont makes progress tackling this incredible urgent issue, and also doing it in a way that grows our economy and ensures equity. So Senator Ashe is going to share a little bit about his vision for climate action in every single committee room in the state Senate. So welcome, Senator Ashe.
Well, thank you, and
Sorry.
Does this work? Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to begin really with an acknowledgement of the work that many of you do. There are people in the room who are paid to do the work you do that fights climate change in whichever sector it is, and I absolutely commend all of you who fall into that category. But there are many of you who do not get paid to do the work that we're talking about today, and I'm especially grateful for you. Many of you toil away on energy committees or local transportation committees, and sometimes you wonder, are all the meetings worth it? And they absolutely are, because it is the faces in a room like this that really speak to people like me and Senators Perchlik and McDonald, and the House members are here, and say the people want this and the people expect it and they've got to get it. And just in the last few years, it has been local town energy committees who have brought forth policies which have created some of the largest solar projects in the state. I'm specifically thinking about South Burlington and Brattleboro, where it was Joey working with town energy committees that actually brought that to the legislature, and we passed it, and both of those projects now are producing a huge amount of clean energy. So I just wanted to say how appreciative I am of those of you on the ground doing this on a volunteer basis, because you know how important this is. So when Joey asked me to speak, I thought, well, all right, you need a good title. And at the time I thought combating climate change in every committee room sounded great. Then I had to figure out, all right, well, what does that look like? But I think I've settled on some stuff to work. But I want to begin, though, by just kind of painting the Vermont emissions picture as I see it. And much of it will be perhaps a slightly different twist on some of the themes that have already been explored today. But I'll begin with the simple acknowledgement that it is our transportation sector that not only is the biggest contributor to harmful emissions in Vermont, but also an acknowledgement or admission that the legislature and executive branch over the last several decades have not focused at all, in my opinion, on this important area. And as Joey said, one of my missions as the leader of the Senate and now a member of our Transportation Committee is to change that. But when we start, one of the important things is so many people are so passionate appropriately about doing our part to fight climate change. And we often think about ourselves in relation to other states. And I want to first just situate us with some of the other states, because what we frequently will hear is references from point A to point B and what our emissions profile has looked like. And one of Vermont's special challenges is going to be highlighted in the next few slides. The New York Times put together these really snazzy electric generation charts for every single state in the country, and if anyone wants a link, I'm happy to forward it to you. So I'm going to just show you Vermont and then Massachusetts and one other state to follow. And what it shows is basically from 2001 till roughly today what the electric generation profile has been in each state. And you'll see here, obviously, this big whale-looking thing, the nuclear, that was Vermont Yankee, and when it got shut down, obviously nuclear went to 0%, and others had to make up that percentage of Vermont's electrical mix. But the picture here says that from the electric generating side, Vermont had relatively low emissions to start with in-state, and it has relatively low emissions here at the finish line. We look at a state like Massachusetts, the picture is a little bit different. Their starting picture, you see the brown sort of second largest snaking thing going from left to right, and the pink one right below it. That's coal and petroleum electric generation. So one of the ways they've been able to succeed in reducing their statewide emissions has been to, and we're glad for this, shut down coal and petroleum power stations. Same rough story is told when you look at New York. In New York, you can see that they had coal and petroleum. As they phased those out, they resorted to other sources of electric generation, which have their own issues, but are lower in the harmful emissions that are produced. So from an electric generation side, Vermont didn't have some of the, what I'll call low-hanging, horrible fruits to pick that some of our neighboring states have had. Where we look a lot more like the states around us is when it comes to transportation. Again, the New York Times put together this really wonderful interactive map. The only thing wonderful about it is how interactive it is. The news it tells is actually quite bad. But what you'll see here, and I'll read out just a few for people who might struggle to see some of the information, is that in metro areas, all in our region, the transportation emissions have been going up considerably. Portland, Maine, 46% increase since 1990. The Albany metro area, 17% in the same period of time. Worcester, 18% increase. Providence, 13% increase. And on with the other municipalities. Vermont, at the same time, 28%. So one of the higher increases that we've seen in that period. So Vermont is not alone in its negligence of taking on transportation emissions. And that's why I'm very pleased at the work that's going on to move towards the Transportation and Climate Initiative with all of these states so that we can start doing something about it. One of the particular challenges we have is the vehicles that exist on the roads today. We all know that electric vehicles, we only have something just over 3,000 on the road registered today, that we need far more, far quicker. I am sometimes accused of being a little bit of a geek, so I got a very large spreadsheet and I tried to figure out what are the most prevalent registered vehicles in Vermont today. So this data here, this is the number of actual vehicles of any age for each of these vehicle types, and you can see that number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are trucks. Well, there are no electric trucks right now that are on the market in Vermont. And that presents some interesting challenges because not only are they 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they're 1, 2, 3, and 4 by far. There's about 25,000 Ford F-Series trucks on the road. There's almost 20,000 Chevy Silverados, and there's just under that of both the Toyota and GMC models. So we have people purchasing relatively inefficient vehicles because that's rural Vermont and having to get through muddy roads and all those other things. But it speaks to one of those challenges as the auto manufacturers are not creating more efficient versions of these vehicles. It actually makes our challenge of addressing the emissions all the more difficult. Now, the next 3 slides, and I'll be very quick because I do want to have the opportunity for as many questions as possible. This ISO New England. ISO New England, for those of you who don't know, is the New England-wide, basically power supply partnership. And this represents the current mix, if you look all the way to the right of the image that you're looking at, of electric generation throughout the state. And you can see that we've phased out some really nasty stuff, but not nearly at the levels we need. Now, I have an app on my phone. I only have like 3 apps. One of them is ISO to go. ISO to go makes me, I'll let you judge what that makes me. But at 8:30 this morning, I produced this image off my app, which meant that when the lights went on at this facility, this was the power source that was producing the electricity throughout the entire region. The big 50+% one is natural gas. The orange, which is the next biggest, 30% nuclear, 10% renewables, and then hydro, 7%, and coal, just under 1%. So as we think about enhancing our transportation fleet, we have to remember that when someone plugs their vehicle into the wall, the power that's sourcing it it's not necessarily clean power. So we've got to be working on multiple fronts to make sure that not only are we electrifying, but when we do, it's good, clean power. Now, we also have this issue. It said something like 7 to 10% was renewables. Well, what is renewables? At the exact same time, I was able to say, of that slice of renewable, what were the sources of renewable power? And you'll see here, 37% was wind power. This is wind being produced all over the New England region. 29% refuse. I'm not sure many people knew that incinerating waste was our second highest source of renewable power when we put on the lights here at Lake Maury. And then wood, 29%, landfill gas, 3%, and solar, 3%. So I say those not because it's important for that particular moment, but as we think about the relationship of beneficial electrification with the actual sources of that electricity, that has to really be on our minds. Now, I'm going to briefly tell you some of the things we did last year. I'll make these things available so you can look in greater detail and forward me questions if you have them. But one of the things we sometimes hear from people who are deeply passionate about fighting climate change is, why haven't you done anything? And to be fair to the people in this room, if any of you have said that, we hear that from almost every group on every issue, is why haven't you done it? Because we all know the challenges are so great and our individual, every year our strategies are not sufficient to solve problems decades in the making. However, just on the transportation front, while we work through the Transportation Climate Initiative negotiations, which are very promising, we made significant strides in trying to reduce transportation emissions with the dollars we already have. The first issue here, and I'll highlight, is the Park and Ride program. This may seem small, but of course the most fuel efficient and least emitting vehicle is the one you don't get into. And so Park and Rides, we have funded the construction and design of 544 more by the end of the 2020 construction season. That is a 1/3 statewide increase, not to be overlooked as we think about strategies that we need to bring to bear. And I'll put it in perspective. I live in Burlington. 142 spaces are going to go up in Williston. You can imagine the demand there is for those spaces in getting 142 cars off the road as they head south, either to Waterbury, Montpelier, or beyond. There are other ones that are kind of in queue lining up on I-91 and other ones on I-89. So the whole state will benefit from these kinds of investments. On public transit, you can see the significant increases we've made there. But I'm going to tell you, these are challenging times for public transit. We effectively have one large public transit system in the state, which is Green Mountain Transit, which is in Chittenden County and Washington County and a little bit of dabbling elsewhere. They're under some real duress right now in their budget and talking about cutting routes, cutting marketing to get more people into public transit. So one of the things the legislature has done is proceeded with a full investigation and hired some really great transportation thinkers to think about how we get more people realistically into public transit. On the rail side, we're finally inching towards rail service to New York City from Burlington, which will benefit the entire western corridor of the state. These are real dollar investments that are really making a difference. We also set in motion a number of inquiries. For instance, should we provide a time of sale rebate to people who purchase vehicles that perform at a good environmental level with a disincentive for those who are buying cars that are not very efficient? Yeah. That is a very, I think I heard, that was like a straw poll. But I think, let's be clear, for many people who aren't in this room, that is a serious political question, and we're going to have to grapple with that, but it's an important one. I'll tell you one little bit of trivia. According to knowledgeable people at the Energy Action Network, I hope they're knowledgeable because I'm about to cite it as a fact, that the average statewide miles per gallon for the vehicles on the road is just more than 22 miles a gallon. So just think about what that means as we think about needing to do more on transportation emissions. 22 miles per gallon. Did I get that right, Jared?
That's what our latest report says.
All right, so if you trust Energy Action Network, it's 22 miles a gallon. We're also trying to model behavior out of state government to do the things that we're encouraging people in their private lives to do. And a few examples, our own state transportation fleet. Senator Perchlik and I on the Transportation Committee looked at all the state-owned vehicles. You can see here there's 734. We found that only 54 of them happen to be hybrids or electric, and have created new purchasing requirements to significantly boost that. And then lastly, we created 2 programs, one to provide cash incentives for people who are buying plug-in electric vehicles. That is likely to go live later, well, in this upcoming week. So stay tuned for those of you who have had interest but have been unable to purchase it for financial reasons. Those incentives will come online. We've also importantly considered equity already in making sure that we're not just thinking about the change in transportation from the point of view of those who have the resources to perhaps buy a new electric car, but to make sure that lower income people, especially in rural areas, have access to high efficiency vehicles no matter what they are. And I just want to settle on that one because I find that an interesting example of the kind of difficult challenges we have. Last year when the Senate Transportation Committee started talking about a program to use funds to help people get into used hybrids that have combustion engines, there were some in the environmental community who said, no, it has to be electric. We said, if you are interested in equity and doing a better job for the environment, you have to also be willing for those who can't afford to buy an electric car to support them to get into something much better than what they have. If you're in a 15 mile a gallon car and you can get into a used hybrid that gets 50, for you that is a huge environmental improvement, and leaving that person with no options should not be something that we all accept. So we have our challenges ahead in that regard. We did some things that weren't transportation. This is not meant to be focused there, although that's the biggest chunk we've got to address. Working with people like Selena and Zach Ralph, who I saw somewhere in here, and if there are any other House members, doubling weatherization funding, which has been the call for many people in this room for so long. We reauthorized the State Energy Management Plan, which each year is making massive investments in our own state properties to reduce fossil fuel use and save taxpayer money. Extending the advanced wood boiler tax credit, which came out of our Agriculture Committee, and also focusing on the preservation of large tracts of forest land, which historically would have been thought about for their habitat and all those other important considerations, but we're now starting to think about whether they could be important contributors in forest carbon sequestration and the burgeoning thinking about how that would work. So now, and I'm talking fast because I wanted to have questions, so I'm sorry, maybe I'm over-caffeinated. But I said that the challenge of how we would fight climate change in every committee was sort of daunting, but I'm going to give it my best shot, and these are, in my opinion, very sincere strategies that are going to be discussed in the 2020 session. I can speak from the Senate side, but I know that House members here will say that this all makes sense to them. So our Agriculture Committee, which long ago, not so long ago, would have been thinking primarily about their focus just on the dairy industry, have taken a much wider view on their policy front in recent years and are very interested in this issue of how to support landowners, farmers, foresters in the new industry of forest carbon sequestration. There's a great working group that's been meeting, and the Agriculture Committee will be taking that up to see how we can support those strategies, which will help farms be viable while we're at it. On the Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee, so this is each of the Senate committees in alphabetical order, just so you know. The promotion of new housing and investment in downtown and village centers. It's often lost on people that smart growth development is a climate change fighting strategy. There is, I should acknowledge, we have lost a real champion in that regard, Paul Brune. Many of you have worked with Paul, especially preserving. He was at Preservation Trust of Vermont. But people forget that all the work he's done to make the villages and downtowns of Vermont, the special places they've always been, have continued to attract people, is actually a strategy to fight carbon change without putting that name on it. So I want to acknowledge all that he's done. On the education side, we have major capital needs to be made at our K through 12 school infrastructure all throughout the state and at our higher education buildings. And our education committee will be taking a look at how we continue to make progress there. Our finance committee, for those of you who are unfamiliar, our finance committee has oversight of utilities and kind of regulatory agencies like the Public Utility Commission. They will be looking at the issue of accelerating Vermont's 100% renewable electricity requirement and looking at an important shift in how we think about Efficiency Vermont's mission, which we began last year. That one falls into the category of really significant changes that you don't go into lightly, but have tremendous opportunity to reduce carbon emissions on the other side of it. The Government Operations Committee, not normally thought of as a climate change committee. We have draft legislation that will require, as a condition of licensing, that people do an education model in the way their particular occupation affects the environmental performance of the state. Just a couple examples. If you're a plumber, you should have to be educated in how the controls on the equipment you're installing draw down demand for natural gas or whatever the other fuel is. If you're a real estate agent, you should know how solar panels on the roof of a building impact the value of the homes. I'm not sure if they're for or against the real estate people, but I think I'm with them in spirit, though. The Health and Welfare Committee will be looking at resilience issues around climate-related health impacts. Anyone who's seen the data about tick-borne diseases knows that this is not something that's in the future. It's not only is it already here, but we're catching up to how much it's already here. The Institutions Committee will continue to make advances on energy improvement in our state buildings and all the people we fund. The Judiciary Committee, and this is a bit of an interesting one for me, and it's speaking here today that made me really think about how this is something we need to work on. Many of you know that the Trump administration has tried to strike down the CAFE standards. That's what this stands for, Corporate Average Fuel Economy. We call them CAFE. I'm not sure anyone could have told me what that meant. I didn't know. But if those go away and the auto manufacturers do not produce more efficient vehicles, meeting any of our environmental targets will be virtually impossible. So our Judiciary Committee will be at the table with the Attorney General's office, making sure that by some manner we successfully preserve that important environmental strategy where California is the leader. Our Natural Resources and Energy Committee has a whole array of interventions in the discussions that many of you have been having throughout the building here today. Among them, in my opinion, are thinking about the policies around battery storage, which is increasingly an important piece of both resilience, but also making our renewable energy more efficient and more appropriate for meeting needs both in rural and non-rural communities. Also addressing in-state hydro issues. Many of you have read about the Supreme Court case, which requires the curtailment of an existing hydro dam so that the water quality and habitat issues will be enhanced. So here you have two conflicting goals. We want the water quality, we also want the clean power. What happens now, because we have a whole number of other hydro dams around the state who are all going to be facing the exact same issue. So that's going to be something that we all together struggle through. Transportation, I talked a bit about some of these things. All I can tell you is that I am actually really impressed with the team of people Governor Scott has had working on this on our behalf with the other states. Peter Walk, who some of you know, was here earlier talking about TCI, Michelle Boomhauer, Dan Dutcher, and others. They are all delivering the kind of, they're expressing the kind of values that all of the people in this room, I think, would expect them to do, and I think it's a credit to the governor. He has selected this team to be at the table, and I look forward to seeing what they do. And then lastly, appropriations, who I say have to figure out how to pay for all this. It's a small matter, but we'll see how they do. So I'm gonna just finish with this. I have this one image, and I just want to tell you a quick story, and then happy to take questions and whatever time Joey gives me. So this is a photo that was taken in October of 2009. Any of you who know Burlington decently well have seen the building on the right there. That is 3 Cathedral Square, where I used to work, and it's right on the corner of Battery Street and Cherry Street. And that is a 36 kilowatt PV solar system on the top. The photo with me and my compadres there, if we had been on the other side with the panels showing, we'd be dangling from the front of that building, so we opted for safety. But I show this because 2010 is not that long ago. A 36 kilowatt system, this was the biggest one in Burlington, Vermont at the time. Just think about it. Now it would be considered an afterthought project. But 36 kilowatts was the biggest one in Burlington at the time. And so I mentioned that to say how very far we've come in a relatively short time. So we know how much more work we have to do together, but it's worth acknowledging that, I mean, I'm very pro-government. I believe government can change the world for better, for better and for good. But I would never believe we would have been able to move government as fast as we have in the last 9 years on so many fronts. And so I do think that's a tribute to many of the people in this room that you've been able to work with us and push us in those important ways. So with that, I'd love to hear some questions for anything I've missed or things you want to better understand the thinking of the legislature. Thank you.